Trapped in a suffocating relationship, a trembling woman sees her last chance to escape inside a supermarket. With a secret note hastily slipped to an employee, she begins a silent game of survival where every second could be her last. I hope you are having a wonderful day. Your story begins now. The fluorescent lights of the supermarket buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the polished linoleum floor. Laura's fingers trembled slightly as she gripped the shopping cart, her knuckles white with tension. The cool air inside the store felt thick and oppressive, each step echoing in her ears as she pushed the cart down the aisle. Beside her, Daniel, her boyfriend, chatted casually about the dinner they would prepare that evening. His voice was light, almost cheerful, a stark contrast to the storm raging within Laura's chest. To anyone watching, they appeared to be an ordinary couple doing their weekly grocery shopping. But beneath the surface, Laura felt as though she was teetering on the edge of a precipice. Every movement was calculated, every breath measured. Her heart pounded so forcefully she feared Daniel might hear it. She had to appear normal. She had to fool him. Laura took a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm. Don't think about the worst, she told herself. Don't think about what might happen if you fail. As they passed the canned goods aisle, Laura felt a sharp twinge in her wrist. It still ached from the night before when Daniel had grabbed her. It had been quick, discreet, but enough to remind her that he always knew when something was amiss. "Can you grab that tomato sauce, honey?" Daniel asked, his attention focused on the shelves. Laura nodded, forcing a smile as she moved away from him. Her feet felt like lead weights as she approached the shelf. Daniel couldn't suspect anything was wrong. When he turned to pick up a package of pasta, Laura saw her chance. With trembling hands, she slipped a crumpled note into the hand of a nearby employee. Her nails dug into the paper as she pressed it into his palm, her eyes locking with his, in a silent plea. The employee, a young man in a blue apron with a crooked name tag, furrowed his brow as he unfolded the paper. Laura quickly retreated, her heart hammering in her chest. "Call the police. I'm in danger with my boyfriend. Please don't let him know." Laura didn't dare look back. What if he doesn't believe me? What if Daniel notices I'm nervous? She took a deep breath and returned to Daniel's side, plastering a smile on her face. The weight of her secret felt crushing, but she knew this might be her only chance at freedom. The young employee felt a chill run down his spine as he read the note. He glanced around, taking in the security cameras and other customers. The girl seemed normal. The boyfriend seemed normal, but he knew something was terribly wrong. He needed to act, but doubt gnawed at him. What if it was all a misunderstanding? What if he called the police and it turned out to be nothing? But what if he didn't call, and this was the last time anyone ever saw that girl? At the checkout, Laura struggled to keep her hands steady as she unloaded items onto the conveyor belt. The employee moved discreetly through the store, approaching the manager. He tried to conceal the note in his palm, his heart racing. But then, Daniel noticed, his eyes darted around the store, his expression shifting. His dark gaze landed on the employee, who was exchanging hurried words with the manager. Laura's stomach churned as she felt Daniel stiffen beside her. "We're leaving now," he said, his voice low but laced with menace. Laura hesitated, fear paralyzing her for a moment. Daniel's grip tightened on her wrist, sending a jolt of pain through her already bruised skin. The employee froze, looking to the manager, who nodded urgently. "Police, yes, a possible kidnapping. Martin's supermarket, right now." The air grew heavy with tension. The automatic doors loomed ahead. Laura could see the exit, but she felt her chances of escape slipping away with each passing second. "If you've done something," Daniel whispered in her ear, his voice as cold as a blade against her skin, "I'll know." Terror coursed through her veins. She held her breath, praying for a miracle. And then, red lights reflected off the store's windows. Sirens pierced the air. Daniel froze, his hand releasing Laura's for just a moment that felt like an eternity. "Sir, let her go and put your hands up," a police officer's voice echoed through the supermarket. But Daniel reacted quickly. He grabbed Laura's arm, trying to pull her with him. "She's my girlfriend. This is a mistake." His voice was louder now, mixing with the sound of sirens. Laura felt his fingers digging into her skin. No, not again. She didn't think. She pushed hard. Daniel lost his balance for an instant, long enough for the officers to close in. Everything happened quickly after that. Hands restraining Daniel, firm voices giving orders, the sound of handcuffs clicking into place. Laura stumbled backward, her heart still racing, her hands shaking. She looked around, as if danger might still be lurking nearby, as if he might return at any moment, but he didn't. The employee watched her from a distance, his eyes wide with concern and relief. Laura took a deep breath, deep enough to feel her lungs truly fill for the first time. In what felt like ages, she was free. As Laura stepped out of the police station, the cool night air felt like a breath of freedom against her skin. Unsure of where to go, she was approached by a kind-faced older woman who introduced herself as the owner of a nearby guest house. "I have a vacant room if you need it," she offered gently. After a moment's hesitation, Laura realized she needed a safe place to start anew. With a lump in her throat, she accepted the offer. For the first time in a long while, she walked without fear of what tomorrow might bring. The guest house was a quaint two-story building with faded blue shutters and a wraparound porch. As Laura followed the owner, Mrs. Evelyn Santos, up the creaking wooden stairs, she felt a curious mix of exhaustion and alertness. Every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat, every sound a reason to flinch. "Here we are, dear," Mrs. Santos said, pushing open a door at the end of the hallway. "It's not much, but it's clean and quiet." Laura stepped inside, her eyes taking in the small but cozy room, a single bed with a patchwork quilt, a dresser with a mirror that had seen better days, a window overlooking the street below. It was simple, but to Laura, it looked like sanctuary. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Santos studied her for a moment, concern etched in the lines of her face. "You're safe here, you know. No one will bother you." Laura nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As the door closed softly behind Mrs. Santos, Laura sank onto the bed, the events of the day crashing over her like a tidal wave. She was free. The thought kept repeating in her mind, but it felt surreal, as if she might wake up at any moment to find it was all a dream. Her fingers absently traced the fading bruise on her wrist, a tangible reminder of the life she'd left behind. As the adrenaline began to ebb, exhaustion took its place. Laura curled up on the bed, not bothering to change out of her clothes. Sleep came quickly, but it was far from peaceful. In her dreams, she was back in the apartment she'd shared with Daniel. The walls seemed to close in around her as she heard his footsteps approaching. She tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Laura jolted awake, her heart racing. Sunlight streamed through the window, and for a moment she didn't know where she was. Then reality settled in, bringing with it a mix of relief and uncertainty. She made her way to the small adjoining bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. The woman in the mirror looked like a stranger, pale, with dark circles under her eyes. But there was something else there, too. A glimmer of hope, perhaps. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "Laura, it's Evelyn. I've brought you some breakfast if you're feeling up to it." Laura hesitated for a moment before opening the door. Mrs. Santos stood there with a tray of toast, eggs, and orange juice. "I thought you might be hungry," she said with a kind smile. "Thank you," Laura replied, realizing she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. "You didn't have to do this." "Nonsense," Mrs. Santos said, setting the tray on the small desk by the window. "It's no trouble at all." As Laura sat down to eat, Mrs. Santos lingered in the doorway. "I hope you don't mind me saying, but, well, if you need someone to talk to, I'm a good listener." Laura looked up, surprised by the offer. She'd grown accustomed to keeping everything bottled up inside, to presenting a facade of normalcy to the world. The idea of opening up to someone felt both terrifying and strangely appealing. I don't know where to start," Laura admitted, her voice barely audible. Mrs. Santos pulled up a chair, her presence comforting rather than intrusive. "The beginning is usually a good place," she said gently. And so, haltingly at first, then with increasing urgency, Laura began to speak. She told Mrs. Santos about meeting Daniel 3 years ago, how charming and attentive he'd been at first. She spoke of the subtle changes, the possessiveness that had seemed like protectiveness, the jealousy that had masqueraded as love. "I didn't even realize what was happening at first," Laura said, her eyes fixed on her hands. "It was like being in a pot of water that's slowly heating up. By the time you realize it's boiling, it's too late." Mrs. Santos listened without judgment, offering tissues when Laura's eyes welled with tears. As the story unfolded, the isolation from friends and family, the controlling behavior, the emotional manipulation that had escalated to physical abuse. Mrs. Santos's expression grew increasingly concerned. "Oh, my dear," she said softly when Laura finally fell silent. "I'm so sorry you went through all that. But you're incredibly brave, you know that? What you did yesterday, that took real courage." Laura looked up, meeting Mrs. Santos's eyes for the first time. "I was terrified," she admitted. "I still am. What if he finds me? What if—" "We won't let that happen," Mrs. Santos said firmly. "You're not alone anymore, Laura. There are people who can help, support groups, counselors, and you've got me in your corner now for whatever that's worth." A faint smile tugged at Laura's lips. "It's worth a lot," she said. "Thank you." As Mrs. Santos gathered up the breakfast tray, she paused at the door. "You know, Laura, healing isn't a straight line. There will be good days and bad days. But you've taken the first step, and that's the hardest part." After Mrs. Santos left, Laura stood by the window looking out at the street below. People walked by, going about their daily lives. Cars passed. A dog barked in the distance. Normal, everyday sounds that had seemed so far out of reach just yesterday. She thought about Mrs. Santos's words. Healing isn't a straight line. It was a daunting prospect, the idea of rebuilding her life from scratch. But for the first time in years, Laura felt a flicker of something she'd almost forgotten: hope. She had a long road ahead, but she wasn't walking it alone anymore. And that, Laura realized, made all the difference in the world. The next few days passed in a blur for Laura. She spent most of her time in the safety of her room, venturing out only for meals in the small dining room downstairs. Mrs. Santos, true to her word, proved to be a constant source of support, gently, encouraging Laura without pushing too hard. On the third morning, Laura woke to find a small notebook and pen on her bedside table. A note from Mrs. Santos was tucked inside. "Sometimes writing our thoughts down can help us make sense of them. Just a suggestion. Evelyn." Laura picked up the pen, twirling it between her fingers. She'd always enjoyed writing back before everything. Daniel had discouraged it, saying it was a waste of time. But now the blank pages seemed to call to her. Hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, Laura began to write. She poured out her fears, her hopes, her anger at what had been taken from her. The words flowed like a river, carrying with them some of the weight she'd been carrying for so long. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Laura set down the pen, her hand cramping slightly. She felt lighter somehow. Not healed, not by a long shot, but as if she'd taken a small step in the right direction. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. "Laura, there's someone here to see you," Mrs. Santos called softly. Laura's heart rate spiked. Had Daniel found her? But no, Mrs. Santos wouldn't sound so calm if that were the case. "It's Officer Carla Mendez," Mrs. Santos continued, "from the police station. She'd like to talk to you if you're up for it." Laura took a deep breath, steeling herself. She knew this conversation was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. "Okay," she called back. "I'll be right down." In the small sitting room downstairs, Officer Mendez waited, a folder in her hands and a compassionate look on her face. She stood as Laura entered, offering a reassuring smile. "Miss Silva, thank you for agreeing to speak with me," she said, gesturing for Laura to take a seat. "I know this isn't easy, but your statement could be crucial in building a case against Mr. Oliveira." Laura nodded, her throat suddenly dry. "I understand," she managed. For the next hour, Laura recounted her relationship with Daniel in painstaking detail. Officer Mendez listened attentively, asking clarifying questions and jotting down notes. With each revelation, each painful memory brought to light, Laura felt a mix of shame and relief. "You have nothing to be ashamed of, Ms. Silva, officer," Mendez said gently, as if reading Laura's thoughts. "The blame lies entirely with your abuser, not with you." As the interview wound down, Officer Mendez handed Laura a card. "This is the number for a local support group for survivors of domestic violence. They offer counseling services as well. I highly recommend reaching out to them." Laura stared at the card, tracing the embossed letters with her finger. "I'll think about it," she said. Officer Mendez nodded. "That's all I ask, and Ms. Silva, you're very brave. What you did at the supermarket and what you're doing now, it takes immense courage." After Officer Mendez left, Laura sat in the quiet of the sitting room, turning the support group's card over in her hands. The thought of sharing her story with strangers was terrifying. But hadn't she already taken the first step by talking to Mrs. Santos and Officer Mendez? With trembling fingers, Laura pulled out her phone, a new one provided by the police to ensure Daniel couldn't track her. She dialed the number on the card before she could talk herself out of it. "Hello, Novo Começo Support Center. How can I help you?" Laura took a deep breath. "My name is Laura. I think I need help." The voice on the other end was warm and understanding. "You've already taken the hardest step, Laura. We're here to support you every step of the way." As Laura hung up the phone, she felt a curious mix of fear and determination. She had an appointment for the following day, her first counseling session. It was overwhelming, the idea of unpacking years of trauma and abuse. But it was also, Laura realized, the next step on her journey to healing. That night, as she lay in bed, Laura found herself reaching for the notebook Mrs. Santos had given her. She opened to a fresh page and began to write. "Today, I took a step forward. I'm terrified of what lies ahead, but for the first time in years, I'm more afraid of going backward than I am of moving forward. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know I won't face it alone." She closed the notebook and turned off the light, feeling a small spark of hope kindling in her chest. Tomorrow was another day, another chance to reclaim her life, and Laura was determined to make the most of it. The following morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the tumult of emotions swirling within Laura. As she prepared for her first counseling session, her stomach churned with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The thought of laying bare her deepest wounds to a stranger was daunting, to say the least. Mrs. Santos knocked softly on her door. "Laura, are you ready, dear? I can drive you to the center if you'd like." Laura hesitated for a moment before opening the door. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Santos, but I think I need to do this on my own." The older woman nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Of course. Just remember, you're stronger than you know." With those words echoing in her mind, Laura set out. The Novo Começo Support Center was only a few blocks away, but each step felt like a mile. As she approached the nondescript building, Laura's resolve wavered. It would be so easy to turn around, to retreat to the safety of her room at the guest house. But the memory of Daniel's face, of the fear that had defined her life for so long, propelled her forward. Inside, the center was warm and inviting, with soft colors and comfortable furniture. A young woman at the reception desk greeted Laura with a gentle smile. "You must be Laura," she said. "I'm Anna. Dr. Martins is ready for you whenever you're comfortable." Laura nodded, unable to find her voice. Anna led her to a small office where a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and salt-and-pepper hair waited. "Hello, Laura," Dr. Martins said, her voice warm and steady. "I'm glad you're here. Why don't you have a seat and we can talk about what brought you to us?" For the next hour, Laura found herself opening up in ways she hadn't thought possible. Dr. Martins listened without judgment, offering guidance and support as Laura haltingly shared her story. By the end of the session, Laura felt drained, but somehow lighter, as if she'd set down a heavy burden she'd been carrying for years. "You've taken an incredibly brave step today, Laura," Dr. Martins said as their time drew to a close. "Healing is a journey, and it won't always be easy, but you don't have to walk this path alone." As Laura left the office, she noticed a flyer on the bulletin board advertising a support group meeting that evening. Her first instinct was to look away, but something made her pause. Maybe it was time to stop running from connection. With trembling hands, she took down the flyer's information. Later that evening, Laura found herself standing outside the community center where the support group met. Her heart raced as she pushed open the door, the sound of quiet conversation reaching her ears. The room was set up with chairs in a circle. A few people were already seated, talking in low voices. Laura's eyes darted around, looking for an escape. Truth, when a voice caught her attention. "Laura, is that you?" She turned to see a familiar face, the young employee from the supermarket who had helped her escape. He looked as surprised as she felt. "I'm Miguel," he said, approaching her, slowly as if afraid she might bolt. I've been worried about you. Are you okay?" Laura felt a lump form in her throat. This stranger had risked so much to help her, and here he was, still concerned about her well-being. "I'm getting there," she managed to say. "Thank you for everything you did that day." Miguel's face softened. "I'm just glad you're safe." "Are you here for the meeting?" Laura nodded, her nerves returning full force. "Me too," Miguel said. "It's my first time. Maybe we could sit together?" As they took their seats, Laura felt a small spark of warmth in her chest. She wasn't alone in this room full of strangers. She had an ally, someone who had seen her at her most vulnerable and still chose to stand by her. The group facilitator, a woman named Renata, began the meeting with a gentle introduction. "We're all here because we've experienced trauma," she said. "But we're also here because we're survivors, and we're choosing to reclaim our lives." As the meeting progressed, Laura listened to others share their stories. Some were further along in their healing journey, while others were just beginning like her. With each story, she felt a little less alone, a little less broken. When it came time for her to speak, Laura hesitated, but then she felt Miguel's reassuring presence beside her, and the words began to flow. She spoke of her fears, her doubts, and her hopes for the future. As she finished, Laura looked around the circle. There were nods of understanding, eyes shining with empathy. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen and understood. After the meeting, Miguel walked with her back towards the guest house. "You know," he said softly, "what you did that day in the supermarket, it was one of the bravest things I've ever seen." Laura felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified." "But you did it anyway," Miguel pointed out. "That's what real courage is." As they reached the guest house, Laura turned to face him. "Thank you for being there tonight. It meant a lot." Miguel smiled. "That's what friends are for, right?" Friends. The word felt foreign to Laura after years of isolation, but it also felt right. As she watched Miguel walk away, she realized that her world was slowly expanding. She was no longer trapped in the suffocating bubble Daniel had created. She was building connections, forming a support network that would help her navigate the challenging road ahead. That night, as Laura wrote in her journal, she reflected on the unexpected turns her life had taken. She had a long way to go, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was walking the path alone. With each small step, with each new connection, she was reclaiming pieces of herself that she thought had been lost forever. As she closed her journal, Laura felt a sense of cautious optimism. Tomorrow was another day, another opportunity to heal, to grow, to rediscover the person she used to be, and perhaps to become someone even stronger. The next few weeks passed in a blur of counseling sessions, support group meetings, and quiet evenings at the guest house. Laura found herself settling into a routine, the predictability of her days offering a sense of security she hadn't experienced in years. But as her outer world stabilized, her inner world remained in turmoil. One morning, as Laura sat at the small desk in her room, staring at the blank page of her journal, a memory surfaced unbidden. It was her 25th birthday, just a few months into her relationship with Daniel. He had surprised her with a beautiful necklace, a delicate silver chain with a small heart pendant. "So you'll always remember that your heart belongs to me," he had said, fastening it around her neck. At the time, Laura had been touched by the gesture. Now the memory made her skin crawl. How quickly that symbol of love had become a collar, a constant reminder of his ownership. Laura's hand moved to her throat, half expecting to feel the weight of the necklace. But it wasn't there. She had left it behind, along with everything else when she fled. A knock at the door startled her from her reverie. "Laura," Mrs. Santos called. "There's a package for you." Laura froze. A package? Who would be sending her anything? Fear gripped her heart as she opened the door. Mrs. Santos stood there, holding a small brown parcel. "It's from the police station," she said, noticing Laura's distress. Officer Mendez dropped it off herself. Relieved but still wary, Laura took the package. Inside she found a note from Officer Mendez, along with a familiar silver chain. "We found this among the personal effects we seized from Mr. Oliveira's apartment. We thought you might want it back. Remember, it's your choice what to do with it now." Laura stared at the necklace, emotions warring within her. Part of her wanted to throw it away, to erase every trace of Daniel from her life. But another part recognized it as a symbol of her journey, a reminder of how far she had come. That afternoon, in her counseling session with Dr. Martins, Laura brought up the necklace. "It's natural to have conflicting feelings about objects associated with your past," Dr. Martins said. "What's important is that now you have the power to choose what role, if any, these objects play in your life moving forward." Laura nodded, turning the necklace over in her hands. I think I want to sell it. Maybe use the money to do something for myself, something Daniel would have never approved of." Dr. Martins smiled encouragingly. "That sounds like a wonderful idea, Laura. It's a way of reclaiming your autonomy, of turning something painful into something positive." As Laura left the counseling center, she felt a sense of determination. She would no longer let Daniel's ghost control her actions or her emotions. It was time to start making choices for herself, to rediscover the things that brought her joy. On her way back to the guest house, Laura passed a small bookshop. She paused, remembering how much she used to love reading before Daniel had deemed it a waste of time. Without hesitation, she stepped inside, the smell of paper and ink enveloping her like an old friend. As she browsed the shelves, a title caught her eye. "Reclaiming Your Life After Trauma." Laura picked it up, along with a novel she had always wanted to read but never had the chance to. At the counter, the shopkeeper, an older man with kind eyes, smiled at her selections. "Both excellent choices," he said. "You know, we have a book club that meets here every other week. You're welcome to join if you're interested." Laura hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I'd like that," she said, surprising herself with her eagerness. As she left the shop, books in hand, Laura felt a small thrill of excitement. She was making choices, forging connections, slowly rebuilding her world brick by brick. That evening, as she settled into bed with her new book, Laura reflected on the day's events. The necklace lay on her bedside table, a reminder of the past, but no longer a shackle. Tomorrow, she would look into selling it, using the proceeds to invest in her future. She opened her journal, pen poised over the page. "Today I chose myself. I chose my healing, my growth, my happiness." It's a small step, but it feels monumental. For so long, my world revolved around Daniel's wants and needs. Now I'm learning to put myself first. It's scary, and sometimes I still hear his voice in my head telling me I'm being selfish. But I'm learning to quiet that voice, to replace it with my own. I am worthy of love, of joy, of peace. And I'm going to keep reminding myself of that every single day. As Laura closed her journal and turned off the light, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead was still long and undoubtedly challenging, but for the first time she felt truly equipped to face it. With each small victory, with each reclaimed piece of herself, Laura was becoming stronger. And that strength she was beginning to realize was her most powerful weapon against the shadows of her past. The early morning sun filtered through the curtains as Laura stirred awake. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. The unfamiliar room, the absence of Daniel's presence beside her. Then, as it had every morning for the past few weeks, reality settled in. She was safe, she was free. Laura reached for her journal, a habit that had become as essential as breathing. As she wrote about her plans for the day, a realization struck her. It had been exactly 1 month since her escape from Daniel, 1 month since she had taken control of her own life. The weight of this milestone sat heavy in her chest. Part of her wanted to celebrate, to mark this day as a victory. Another part felt guilty for feeling anything positive about a situation born from so much pain. As if sensing her inner turmoil, there was a soft knock at the door. Mrs. Santos's voice called out, "Laura, dear, are you awake? There's someone here to see you." Curious and a little apprehensive, Laura quickly dressed and made her way downstairs. In the cozy living room of the guest house, she found Miguel waiting, a nervous smile on his face. "Hey," he said, standing as she entered. "I hope it's okay that I dropped by. I remembered what day it was." Laura felt a lump form in her throat. He had remembered. This virtual stranger, who had become such an important part of her new life, had remembered the day that had changed everything. "I thought maybe you'd like to get out for a bit," Miguel continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "There's this nice park nearby, and I packed a picnic, but if you'd rather not, that's totally fine too. I just thought I'd love to," Laura interrupted, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. The park was a small oasis of green in the bustling city. As they spread out the picnic blanket under a large oak tree, Laura felt a sense of peace wash over her. The simple act of sitting in the sunshine, sharing a meal with a friend, it was something she hadn't realized how much she'd missed. As they ate, Miguel told her about his life, his job at the supermarket, his dreams of becoming a social worker, his own experiences with a difficult family situation that had led him to volunteer at the support center. "You know," he said, his voice growing serious, "what happened that day in the supermarket, it changed me too. Seeing your courage, it made me realize how many people might be silently suffering. It's why I decided to go back to school, to try and make a difference." Laura felt tears prick at her eyes. "I never thought of it that way," she said softly. "I was so focused on surviving, I didn't consider how it might have affected others." Miguel reached out, hesitating for a moment, before gently taking her hand. "You're inspiring, Laura, more than you know." As the afternoon wore on, they were joined by a few other familiar faces from the support group. What had started as a simple picnic evolved into an impromptu gathering of survivors and allies, each sharing stories of struggle and triumph. Laura found herself opening up, sharing parts of her story she had previously kept hidden. With each word she felt a little lighter, a little stronger. These people understood in a way that even the most well-meaning outsider never could. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, Laura looked around at the small group that had formed. These were her people now, she realized. Not because they shared a history of pain, but because they shared a commitment to healing, to growth, to supporting one another. Walking back to the guest house with Miguel, Laura felt a shift within herself. For the first time, she was looking forward to the future with hope rather than fear. "Thank you for today," she said, as they reached her door. "It meant more than I can say," Miguel smiled, his eyes warm. "That's what friends are for, right? We're in this together, Laura, all of us." That night, as Laura prepared for bed, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was different from the one who had trembled in fear in a supermarket aisle a month ago. There was a strength in her eyes, a set to her jaw that spoke of resilience. She opened her journal one last time. "1 month ago, I thought my life was over. I couldn't see a way out, couldn't imagine a future beyond the next moment of fear. But here I am, not just surviving, but starting to thrive. I have friends who support me, a safe place to call home, and for the first time in years, hope for the future. I know the road ahead won't always be easy. There will be setbacks, moments of doubt, days when the weight of the past feels too heavy to bear. But I'm not alone anymore. I have people in my corner fighting alongside me, and I'm starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, I'm strong enough to face whatever comes next." Today wasn't just about surviving another day. It was about choosing to live fully and without fear. And that, I'm realizing, is the greatest victory of all. As Laura closed her journal and turned off the light, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. Tomorrow was a new day, full of possibilities, and for the first time in years she was excited to see what it would bring. The following weeks saw Laura settling into a rhythm of healing and self-discovery. Her days were filled with counseling, sessions, support group meetings, and quiet moments of reflection. She had even started volunteering at the local library, surrounded by the books she had once been forbidden to enjoy. It was on a crisp autumn morning, as Laura was shelving books in the library's fiction section, that her world tilted on its axis once again. "Laura?" The voice, achingly familiar, sent a chill down her spine. She turned slowly, her heart pounding, to find herself face to face with Mariana, her younger sister. "Mari," Laura whispered, her voice barely audible. The following weeks saw Laura settling into a rhythm of healing and self-discovery. Her days were filled with counseling sessions, support group meetings, and quiet moments of reflection. She had even started volunteering at the local library, surrounded by the books she had once been forbidden to enjoy. It was on a crisp autumn morning, as Laura was shelving books in the library's fiction section, that her world tilted on its axis once again. "Laura?" The voice, achingly familiar, sent a chill down her spine. She turned slowly, her heart pounding, to find herself face to face with Mariana, her younger sister. "Mari?" Laura whispered, her voice barely audible. "What? How did you find me?" Mariana stood there, her eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and relief. "I've been looking for you for months," she said, her voice trembling. "Ever since you disappeared, I was so worried." Laura felt a rush of emotions, joy at seeing her sister, guilt for having cut off contact, fear of what this might mean for her carefully constructed new life. She glanced around, suddenly aware of their public surroundings. "Can we talk somewhere private?" she asked, her voice low. Mariana nodded, following Laura to a small reading room tucked away in a quiet corner of the library. As soon as the door closed behind them, Mariana engulfed Laura in a tight embrace. "I thought I'd lost you," Mariana sobbed, her words muffled against Laura's shoulder. "When you stopped answering my calls, when you moved out without telling anyone, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how to help." Laura felt tears stinging her own eyes as she held her sister. She had missed this, the comfort of family, the unconditional love, but along with the warmth came a tide of painful memories. "I'm so sorry, Mari," Laura said, pulling back to look at her sister. "I wanted to reach out, but I was afraid. Afraid of what Daniel might do if he found out. Afraid of dragging you into my mess." Mariana's expression hardened at the mention of Daniel's name. "What did he do to you, Laura? Tell me the truth." And so, sitting in that small room surrounded by books, Laura told her sister everything. She spoke of the gradual isolation, the emotional manipulation, the physical abuse that had finally pushed her to flee. Mariana listened, her face a mixture of horror and fierce protectiveness. "Why didn't you tell me?" Mariana asked when Laura finished, her voice pained. "I could have helped. We could have gotten you out sooner." Laura shook her head, a sad smile on her face. "I was ashamed, Mari, and scared. Daniel had convinced me that no one would believe me, that I had nowhere to go. It took me a long time to realize that wasn't true." Mariana took Laura's hands in hers, her grip firm. "Listen to me, Laura. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Nothing. What Daniel did, that's on him, not you, and you'll always have a place with me no matter what." The sisters talked for hours, making up for lost time. Laura learned that their parents had been frantic with worry, that Mariana had taken time off work to search for her. She felt a pang of guilt for the pain she had caused, but Mariana was quick to reassure her. "You did what you had to do to survive," Mariana said firmly. "We're just glad you're safe now." As the afternoon wore on, Laura found herself facing a decision she hadn't anticipated. Mariana wanted her to come home to reconnect with their family. Part of Laura yearned for it, the comfort of familiar surroundings, the support of those who had known her longest. But another part of her hesitated. She had built something here, a support system, a new beginning. The thought of leaving, of potentially running into Daniel or falling back into old patterns, terrified her. I need some time to think about it," Laura said finally. "This place, these people, they've become my lifeline, Mari. I'm not sure I'm ready to leave yet. Mariana nodded, understanding in her eyes. Take all the time you need. Just promise me you won't disappear again. I can't lose you a second time. As they parted ways, Laura felt a mix of emotions swirling within her. The unexpected reunion had thrown her carefully constructed world into disarray. She had been so focused on moving forward, on healing, that she hadn't considered what it would mean to confront her past. That evening, as Laura sat in her room, at the guest house, she found herself at a crossroads. The path forward, which had seemed so clear just that morning, now forked in two directions. Should she return to her family, to the life she had left behind? Or should she continue on this new path, building on the strength and independence she had found? She opened her journal, hoping the act of writing would help clarify her thoughts. Today, my past and present collided in a way I never expected. Seeing Mari brought back so many memories, good and bad. I'm torn between the comfort of what I've always known and the freedom of what I've discovered. I know I'm not the same person I was when I left. I'm stronger now, more sure of myself. But am I strong enough to face my old life without losing myself again? There's so much to consider. My family, who I've missed more than I realized. The support system I've built here. Dr. Martins, the group, Miguel. The progress I've made in healing. I know I don't have to decide everything right now, but I can feel change on the horizon. Whatever I choose, I know it will shape the next chapter of my life in ways I can't even imagine. As Laura closed her journal, she felt a curious mix of apprehension and excitement. The future, which had once seemed like a dark, frightening place, now held possibilities she hadn't dared to dream of. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew she had the strength to face whatever came next. Tomorrow, she decided, she would talk to Dr. Martins, to Miguel, to Mrs. Santos. She would weigh her options carefully, considering not just what she wanted, but what she needed to continue her journey of healing. For now, though, Laura allowed herself a moment of gratitude. Regardless of what she decided, she was no longer alone. She had people in her corner, both from her past and her present, who would support her no matter what. As she drifted off to sleep, Laura felt a sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead might be uncertain, but for the first time, in a long time, she felt ready to face it head-on. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and decision-making for Laura. She found herself caught between two worlds, the comfort and familiarity of her family and the hard-won independence she had built in her new life. Her first stop was Dr. Martin's office, where she poured out her conflicted feelings about Mariana's sudden appearance. "It's natural to feel overwhelmed," Dr. Martins said, her voice calm and reassuring. "This is a big change, and it's bringing up a lot of complex emotions. Remember, Laura, you have the power to set boundaries and make choices that feel right for you." Laura nodded, twisting her hands in her lap. "I know. It's just, I feel guilty for wanting to stay here, for not immediately jumping at the chance to go back to my family. Doesn't that make me selfish?" Dr. Martins leaned forward, her eyes kind but firm. "Laura, choosing what's best for your healing isn't selfish. It's necessary. Your family loves you, but they may not fully understand what you've been through, or what you need right now. It's okay to prioritize your well-being." As she left the counseling center, Laura felt a bit lighter. Dr. Martin's words had given her permission to consider her own needs, something she was still learning to do. Her next stop was the community center, where she knew Miguel would be volunteering. She found him sorting through donations for the center's clothing drive. "Laura," he exclaimed, his face lighting up when he saw her, but his smile faded as he took in her troubled expression. "What's wrong?" She told him about Mariana's visit, about the pull she felt towards her old life, and the fear of leaving behind the progress she'd made. Miguel listened intently, his brow furrowed in concern. "That's a lot to process," he said when she finished. "What do you think you want to do?" Laura sighed, sinking down onto a nearby chair. "I don't know. Part of me wants to go back to reconnect with my family, but another part is terrified of losing myself again, of giving up the independence I've found here." Miguel sat down beside her, his presence comforting. "You know, Laura, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Maybe there's a middle ground. A way to reconnect with your family without giving up the life you've built here. His words struck a chord. Laura had been thinking in absolutes. Stay or go, past or present. But maybe there was another way. That evening, Laura sat down with Mrs. Santos, sharing her dilemma over a cup of tea. The older woman listened patiently, her eyes full of understanding. "My dear," Mrs. Santos said, reaching out to pat Laura's hand, "family is important, but your family too, you know. Your needs, your healing, that matters just as much as theirs." As Laura prepared for bed that night, she felt a sense of clarity beginning to form. She opened her journal, pen poised. Over the page, "I've spent so much time thinking about this choice as an either-or situation, but maybe it doesn't have to be. Maybe I can find a way to bridge my past and my present, to bring the strength I've found here into my relationships with my family. I'm not the same person I was when I left. I'm stronger now, more aware of my own worth. Going back doesn't mean giving that up. It means bringing that new strength with me, using it to reshape old relationships in healthier ways. I think I want to try. Not to move back. Not yet. But to open the door. To let my family back into my life bit by bit. On my terms, at my pace. It's scary, but it also feels right, like the next step in my journey." The next morning, Laura called Mariana. Her sister picked up on the first ring, her voice hopeful. "Mari," Laura said, taking a deep breath, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said about coming home." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "And?" Mariana asked, her voice cautious. "I'm not ready to move back," Laura said firmly. "The life I've built here, the progress I've made, it's important to me, but I'd like to try reconnecting. Maybe you could come visit again? We could spend some time together, and I could show you around my new world." The relief in Mariana's voice was palpable. "Oh, Laura, I'd love that. We all would. We just want to be part of your life again, in whatever way you're comfortable with." As Laura hung up the phone, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't a perfect solution, and she knew there would be challenges ahead. Reintegrating her family into her life, while maintaining her boundaries and continuing her healing journey, wouldn't be easy. But for the first time, Laura felt truly in control of her own story. She wasn't running away, nor was she falling back into old patterns. She was choosing her path forward, on her own terms. That afternoon, as Laura walked to her support group meeting, she felt a new sense of purpose. She had faced one of her biggest fears, confronting her past, and had come out stronger for it. It was a small step, but an important one. As she entered the community center, she was greeted by familiar faces, people who had become her second family over the past months. She realized then that her world had expanded. She didn't have to choose between her old life and her new one. She could build a future that incorporated both, drawing strength from all the parts of herself, past and present. Laura took her seat in the circle, feeling grounded and centered. As the meeting began, she found herself speaking up, sharing her experience of the past few days. The support and encouragement she received from the group reinforced her decision. "You're brave, Laura," one of the group members said. "Choosing to face your past head-on, that takes real courage." As Laura left the meeting, she felt a renewed sense of hope. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, but she no longer faced them alone. She had her support group, her new friends, and now she was beginning to rebuild bridges with her family. The future, which had once seemed like a dark and frightening place, now held possibilities she hadn't dared to imagine. Laura walked back to the guest house, her steps light, ready to embrace whatever came next. The weeks that followed Laura's decision to reconnect with her family were filled with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. She had agreed to meet Mariana for lunch in a small cafe halfway between the guest house and her old neighborhood. As the day approached, Laura found herself oscillating between excitement and dread. The morning of the meeting, Laura stood in front of her mirror, scrutinizing her reflection. She had chosen her outfit carefully, a soft blue sweater that made her feel both comfortable and confident. As she applied a light touch of makeup, she realized she was doing so for herself, not out of fear of judgment or a need to please others. It was a small realization, but one that made her smile. Laura arrived at the cafe early, choosing a table near the back where she could see the door. As she sipped her coffee, she tried to calm her racing heart. This was Mariana, she reminded herself, her little sister, her confidant, not an enemy. When Mariana walked in, Laura's breath caught in her throat. Her sister looked older somehow, worry lines etched around her eyes that hadn't been there before. But when Mariana spotted Laura, her face lit up with a smile that was achingly familiar. "Laura?" Mariana breathed, rushing over to envelop her in a hug. "Oh, it's so good to see you." As they settled into their seats, an awkward silence fell between them. There was so much to say, so many months of separation to bridge, that neither knew quite where to start. "You look good," Mariana finally said, her eyes searching Laura's face. "Healthy, happy even." Laura nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I am, I think. Or at least I'm getting there. It's been a journey." Mariana reached across the table, hesitating for a moment before taking Laura's hand. "I'm so sorry, Laura. I should have seen what was happening. I should have done something sooner." Laura squeezed her sister's hand. "It's not your fault, Mari. I didn't want anyone to see. I was ashamed and scared. But I'm working through that now." As they talked, Laura found herself opening up more than she had expected. She told Mariana about her therapy sessions, about the support group that had become like a second family. She spoke of the small victories, volunteering at the library, making new friends, learning to trust, her own judgment again. Mariana listened intently, her eyes filling with tears at times, but also shining with pride. "You're so strong, Laura," she said. "I always knew you were, but you're amazing." Laura felt a warmth bloom in her chest at her sister's words. For so long she had seen herself as weak, as a victim. Hearing Mariana's admiration helped reinforce the new self-image she had been building. As their conversation continued, Laura found herself asking about their parents, about old friends she had lost touch with. Each piece of information was like a thread, slowly weaving her back into the fabric of her old life. "Mom and Dad would love to see you," Mariana said cautiously. "When you're ready, of course, no pressure." Laura nodded, considering. Maybe we could do a video call sometime soon. I'm not ready for an in-person visit yet, but I'd like to see them." Mariana's face lit up. "They'd love that, Laura, truly." As they finished their meal, Laura felt a sense of peace settle over her. Reconnecting with Mariana hadn't been as difficult as she had feared. Yes, there were still hurdles to overcome, wounds that needed healing. But there was also love, unwavering and unconditional. Before they parted, Mariana hesitated, then pulled a small package from her bag. "I brought something for you," she said. "You don't have to take it if you don't want to, but—" Laura unwrapped the package to find a framed photo of herself and Mariana as children, arms around each other laughing at some long-forgotten joke. "To remind you that no matter what, you always have me," Mariana said softly. Laura felt tears prick at her eyes as she hugged her sister tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." As Laura walked back to the guest house, the framed photo tucked safely in her bag, she felt lighter somehow. The meeting with Mariana had been a step forward, a bridge between her past and her present. That evening, as she sat in her room at the guest house, Laura carefully placed the framed photo on her bedside table. She stared at it for a long moment, taking in the carefree smiles of her younger self and Mariana. It was a tangible reminder of the love and support that had always been there, even when she couldn't see it. Laura opened her journal, feeling a need to process the day's events. Today was a turning point. Seeing Mariana talking about everything that's happened, it was hard, but also incredibly healing. For so long I've kept my past and present separate, as if they were two different lives. But today I started to see how they could coexist. I'm not the same person I was in that photo with Mariana. I've been through so much, grown in ways I never expected. But that girl is still a part of me. Her strength, her laughter, her ability to love and be loved. I don't have to choose between who I was and who I am now. I can be both and more. Reconnecting with my family doesn't mean giving up the independence I've fought so hard for. It means expanding my support system, bringing together all the parts of myself. It's scary but also exciting. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm moving forward, not just running away. As Laura closed her journal, she felt a sense of anticipation building. Tomorrow, she would share this experience with her support group, with Miguel, with Dr. Martins. She was no longer just surviving. She was beginning to thrive. The following weeks saw Laura navigating the delicate balance between her old life and her new one. She had weekly video calls with her parents, short at first but gradually growing longer and more comfortable. Each conversation was a small step towards rebuilding the trust and connection that had been damaged during her time with Daniel. Her support group became a crucial outlet for processing these changes. One evening, as the group sat in their usual circle, Laura found herself sharing more than she had before. "It's strange," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I spent so long pushing my family away, convinced that I had to handle everything on my own. But now letting them back in, it's like I'm stronger for it, not weaker." Miguel, sitting across from her, nodded encouragingly. "That's because you're doing it on your terms, Laura. You're setting boundaries, communicating your needs. That takes real strength." Others in the group murmured in agreement, and Laura felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. These people, who had started as strangers, had become an integral part of her healing journey. As the meeting wound down, the group facilitator, Renata, approached Laura. "I have a favor to ask," she said. "We have a new member joining next week. She's just left an abusive relationship and she's struggling. I was wondering if you'd be willing to be her support buddy." Laura felt a mix of surprise and apprehension. "Me? Are you sure I'm ready for that?" Renata smiled warmly. "Laura, you've come so far. Your experience, your strength. It could be incredibly helpful to someone just starting this journey. But only if you feel comfortable, of course." Laura took a deep breath, considering. The idea of being responsible for someone else's healing journey was daunting. But then she thought of all the people who had supported her. Mrs. Santos, Miguel, her group members. Maybe it was time to pay it forward. "Okay," she said finally, "I'll do it." The following week, Laura met Sophia, the new group member. She was a petite woman with wary eyes and a nervous demeanor that Laura recognized all too well. As they talked after the meeting, Laura felt a fierce protectiveness rise within her. "It gets better," she told Sophia, her voice gentle but firm. "I know it doesn't feel like it now, but you've already taken the hardest step. You're not alone in this." As Sophia's eyes filled with tears, Laura reached out and squeezed her hand. In that moment, she realized how far she had come. Once, she had been the one desperately seeking hope. Now she was able to offer it to others. This new role brought challenges, but also unexpected rewards. Laura found that supporting Sophia strengthened her own resolve, reinforcing the progress she had made. Each time she offered advice or simply listened, she was reminded of her own journey and how much she had overcome. One afternoon, as Laura was leaving the library after her volunteer shift, she ran into Miguel. He was carrying a stack of flyers advertising a domestic violence awareness workshop. "Hey," he said, his face lighting up when he saw her. "I was hoping to catch you. We're looking for speakers for this workshop. People who can share their experiences, offer hope to others. I thought maybe you'd be interested." Laura felt a flutter of panic at the idea of speaking publicly about her experience. But as she looked at Miguel's earnest face, at the flyers in his hands, she felt something else too, a sense of purpose. "Can I think about it?" she asked. Miguel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course, no pressure. Just think about how much your story could help others, you know." That night, Laura sat at her desk, staring at the blank page of her journal. She thought about Sophia, about the workshop Miguel had mentioned. She thought about all the women and men still trapped in situations like the one she had escaped. Slowly, she began to write. "I used to think that healing meant leaving everything behind, the pain, the memories, the person I used to be. But I'm learning that true healing is about integration. It's about taking all the pieces of myself, the broken ones, the strong ones, the ones I'm still discovering, and creating something new. I'm not just a survivor. I'm not just a victim. I'm all of it and more. My experience with Daniel will always be a part of me, but it doesn't define me. What defines me is what I choose to do with that experience. Maybe it's time to use my voice, not just for myself, but for others who might need to hear it. It's scary, the thought of being so vulnerable in public. But if my story can help even one person find the strength to leave, to heal, to reclaim their life, isn't that worth it? As Laura closed her journal, she felt a sense of clarity. She picked up her phone and sent a text to Miguel. I'll do it. Count me in for the workshop. Then, after a moment's hesitation, she opened her video call app and dialed her parents' number. When their faces appeared on the screen, she took a deep breath. "Mom, Dad," she said, her voice steady, "there's something I want to talk to you about, something important." As Laura began to share her story, her whole story, with her parents, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. This was another step forward, another piece of herself reclaimed. The road ahead would still have its challenges, she knew, but Laura no longer faced them alone. She had her family, her friends, her support group, and now she had a new purpose: to use her experience to help others, to be a light for those still finding their way out of the darkness. As she ended the call with her parents, tears and words of love exchanged, Laura felt a sense of peace settle over her. She was no longer just surviving. She was thriving, growing, becoming more fully herself with each passing day, and that, she realized, was the greatest victory of all. The weeks leading up to the Domestic Violence Awareness Workshop were a whirlwind of preparation and self-reflection for Laura. She spent hours crafting her speech, carefully choosing each word to convey not just the pain of her past, but the hope and strength she had found in her journey to healing. As the day of the workshop approached, Laura found herself increasingly nervous. The thought of sharing her most vulnerable experiences with a room full of strangers was daunting. But each time doubt crept in, she reminded herself of why she was doing this: for Sophia, for the countless others still trapped in abusive relationships, and for herself. The morning of the workshop, Laura stood in front of her mirror, taking deep breaths to calm her nerves. She had chosen her outfit carefully, a soft green blouse that made her feel both strong and approachable. As she fastened the delicate silver necklace Mariana had given her for encouragement, Laura caught sight of the framed childhood photo on her bedside table. She smiled, drawing strength from the visual reminder of her support system. At the community center, Miguel greeted her with a warm hug. "You've got this, Laura," he said, his eyes full of pride. "Oh, your story is powerful. It's going to make a difference." As Laura took her place at the podium, her hands trembling slightly, she looked out at the audience. She saw familiar faces, members of her support group, Mrs. Santos beaming encouragingly from the back row. But she also saw strangers, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Taking a deep breath, Laura began to speak. Her voice, shaky at first, grew stronger as she shared her story. The gradual isolation, the emotional manipulation, the moment she realized she had to escape. She spoke of her fears, her struggles, but also of the strength she had discovered within herself. "Leaving was the hardest thing I've ever done," Laura said, her voice clear and steady. "But it was also the most important. I stand here today not just as a survivor, but as someone who is learning to thrive. And I want you to know, whether you're here for yourself or for someone you love, that there is hope. There is a way out, and you are stronger than you know." As Laura concluded her speech, the room erupted in applause. She saw tears in the eyes of many audience members and felt them in her own eyes as well. But these were not tears of sorrow or fear. They were tears of release, of connection, of hope. After the workshop, several people approached Laura, thanking her for her courage in sharing her story. One woman, her voice choked with emotion, hugged Laura tightly. "You've given me the strength to leave," she whispered. "Thank you." That evening, emotionally drained but deeply fulfilled, Laura sat in her room at the guest house. She opened her journal, needing to process the day's events. "Today, I used my voice in a way I never thought possible. I took the darkest parts of my past and turned them into a beacon of hope for others. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I realized something important today. My experience with Daniel will always be a part of me, but it no longer has power over me. Instead, I have the power to use it for good, to help others find their way to freedom and healing. I saw my own journey reflected in the eyes of those in the audience, the fear, the doubt, but also the glimmer of hope. And I realized that healing isn't just an individual journey. It's something we do together, supporting each other, amplifying each other's voices. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this. I want to keep using my voice, not just for myself, but for all those who haven't found their voice yet. This feels like a new chapter, not just in my healing, but in my life. And for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to see where it leads. As Laura closed her journal, she felt a sense of purpose settling over her. She had taken the pain of her past and transformed it into something meaningful, something that could help others. It didn't erase what had happened, but it gave it new context, new meaning. She picked up her phone, scrolling through the numerous messages of support from her family, from Miguel, from her group members. Each one reinforced the network of love and support she had built around herself. Laura paused on a message from Sophia. "Your speech today changed my life. Thank you for showing me that there's light at the end of this tunnel." With a smile, Laura typed out a reply. "We'll walk towards that light together, one day at a time." As she set her phone down, Laura felt a profound sense of peace. She had faced one of her biggest fears, speaking publicly about her abuse, and had come out stronger for it. She had turned her pain into purpose, her struggle into strength. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, she knew. The journey of healing was ongoing, with its ups and downs. But Laura no longer feared the road ahead. She had found her voice, her strength, her purpose, and with each step forward, she was reclaiming not just her life, but her power to shape it. Laura turned off the light, ready for whatever the new day might bring. She was no longer just surviving. She was thriving, growing, becoming more fully herself with each passing day. And that, she realized, was the most beautiful part of her journey. As autumn gave way to winter, Laura found herself busier than ever. Her speech at the workshop had opened up new opportunities. She was invited to speak at other events, to share her story with support groups in neighboring towns. Each time she spoke, she felt a little stronger, a little more confident in her ability to make a difference. But with this new visibility came unexpected challenges. One chilly morning, as Laura was leaving the guest house for her volunteer shift at the library, she noticed a familiar car parked across the street. Her heart raced as she recognized Daniel's mother behind the wheel. For a moment, Laura froze, old fears threatening to overwhelm her. Then, drawing on the strength she had built over the past months, she took a deep breath and approached the car. Daniel's mother rolled down the window, her face a mix of emotions Laura couldn't quite read. "Laura," she said, her voice strained, I saw you on the local news, your speech about domestic violence awareness." Laura nodded, her guard up, but her voice steady. "Yes, I've been doing some speaking engagements." "I had no idea," Daniel's mother said, her eyes filling with tears. "I didn't want to believe, but seeing you speak, hearing your story. I'm so sorry, Laura, for what my son did, for not seeing it sooner." The apology, unexpected and raw, hit Laura like a physical force. She had prepared herself for denial, for anger, but not for this vulnerable admission. "It wasn't your fault," Laura found herself saying, surprised by the certainty in her voice. "Daniel made his own choices, but thank you for saying that, it means a lot." As Daniel's mother drove away, Laura felt a curious mix of emotions. The encounter had shaken her, bringing back memories she thought she had put to rest, but it had also shown her how far she had come. She had faced a piece of her past head-on and emerged stronger for it. That evening, in her support group meeting, Laura shared the experience. The room was silent as she spoke, everyone understanding the significance of the moment. "I realized something today," Laura said, her voice thoughtful. "Healing isn't just about moving forward. Sometimes it's about revisiting the past, but with new strength, new perspective. Each time I face a piece of my old life, I reclaim a little more of myself, Miguel, sitting beside her, squeezed her hand supportively. "You're rewriting your story, Laura. Not erasing the past, but changing its power over you." As the meeting ended, Renata, the group facilitator, pulled Laura aside. "Laura, I have a proposition for you. We're starting a new program, training survivors to become peer counselors. Given how far you've come, how much you've helped others already, I think you'd be perfect for it. Would you be interested?" Laura felt a thrill of excitement mixed with a touch of apprehension. It was a big step, taking on such a formal role in helping others. But as she thought about Sophia, about the woman who had hugged her after the workshop, about all the others still struggling to find their way out of abusive situations, she knew her answer. "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "I'd be honored." That night, as Laura prepared for bed, she found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed in just a few months. From the terrified woman slipping a note to a supermarket employee to someone considering becoming a peer counselor, the transformation seemed almost unbelievable. She opened her journal, needing to process the day's events. Today felt like a test, a crucible of sorts. Facing Daniel's mother, confronting that part of my past. It was terrifying, but I did it. I stood my ground, spoke my truth, and in doing so, I reclaimed a little more of my power. I'm starting to understand that healing isn't a destination. It's a journey, ongoing and ever-changing. Each challenge, each triumph, each moment of vulnerability, they're all part of the process. They're all shaping me, helping me grow into the person I want to be. The offer to become a peer counselor, it feels like a natural next step, but also a huge responsibility. Can I really help others navigate this journey when I'm still on it myself? But then I remember how much it meant to me to hear from others who had been through similar experiences. Maybe that's exactly why I'm suited for this role. I'm nervous, but also excited. It feels like I'm standing on the threshold of something new, something meaningful. I'm not just reclaiming my life anymore. I'm rebuilding it piece by piece into something stronger and more beautiful than before. As Laura closed her journal, she felt a sense of anticipation building within her. Tomorrow, she would start her training as a peer counselor. It was a new challenge, a new opportunity to grow and to help others. She looked around her room at the guest house which had become her sanctuary over the past months. The framed photo of her and Mariana, the books piled on her nightstand, the journal filled with her thoughts and reflections, each item a testament to her journey of healing and growth. Laura realized that while this place had been crucial for her recovery, she was starting to outgrow it. The thought both excited and terrified her. Was she ready to take the next step to truly stand on her own? As she pondered this, her phone buzzed with a message from Miguel. "Heard about the peer counselor opportunity. So proud of you, Laura. You're going to change lives." A warm smile spread across Laura's face. She typed back a quick thank you, feeling grateful for the unwavering support of her friends. With a deep breath, Laura made a decision. It was time to start looking for a place of her own, not because she needed to escape anymore, but because she was ready to build something new. As she drifted off to sleep, Laura felt a sense of peace and purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she was ready to face them. She was no longer defined by her past, but by the strength and resilience she had discovered within herself. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity for Laura. Between her training as a peer counselor, her continued speaking engagements, and her search for a new apartment, she barely had a moment to catch her breath. But rather than feeling overwhelmed, Laura found herself energized by the busy pace of her new life. Her training as a peer counselor was intense but rewarding. Laura absorbed every piece of information, every technique for supporting others through their healing journeys. She found herself drawing not just on the formal training, but on her own experiences, using her past struggles to inform her approach to helping others. One afternoon, as Laura was leaving a particularly emotional training session, she ran into Sophia in the hallway of the community center. The change in the younger woman was remarkable. Gone was the nervous, withdrawn person Laura had first met. In her place stood a woman with a quiet confidence, a spark of determination in her eyes. "Laura," Sophia exclaimed, pulling her into a hug. I heard you're training to be a peer counselor. That's amazing, Laura smiled, warmth blooming in her chest. It's challenging, but I love it. How are you doing, Sophia? I'm good, Sophia said, a note of surprise in her voice, as if she was still getting used to the idea. I started taking art classes. It's something I always wanted to do, but, well, you know. Laura nodded, understanding all too well. I'm so proud of you, Sophia. You've come so far. As they parted ways, Laura felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Seeing Sophia's progress, knowing she had played a small part in it, reinforced her decision to become a peer counselor. That weekend, Laura had scheduled viewings for several apartments. She had invited Mariana to come with her, seeing it as an opportunity to further strengthen their rekindled relationship. As they walked through a small but sunny one-bedroom apartment, Mariana turned to Laura, her eyes shining. This place, it feels like you, Laura. I can see you building a life here. Laura looked around, taking in the large windows, the small balcony perfect for a few potted plants, the cozy nook that would be ideal for reading or writing. She could see it too, a future full of possibility. You're right, she said softly. This is it. This is home. Later that evening, as Laura sat in her room at the guest house, she opened her journal one last time in this space that had been her safe haven. Today feels like a turning point. I'm standing on the threshold of a new chapter in my life. The apartment I chose, it's not just a place to live, it's a statement. It's me saying to the world and to myself that I'm ready to build a future on my own terms. As I pack up my things, I'm struck by how much has changed. The woman who arrived here months ago, terrified and broken, feels like a different person. I'm not naive enough to think that all my struggles are behind me. I know there will still be difficult days, moments when the past threatens to overwhelm me. But I'm no longer afraid of those moments. I know I have the strength to face them. Becoming a peer counselor, finding my own place, these aren't just steps forward. They're leaps. They're me reclaiming my right to dream, to aspire, to grow. I'm not just surviving anymore, I'm thriving. To anyone who might read this in the future, anyone who might be where I was at the beginning of this journal, there is hope. The road is long and often difficult, but you are stronger than you know. You deserve happiness, safety, and love, starting with loving yourself. This isn't an ending. It's a beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to see where this journey takes me next. As Laura closed her journal, she felt a sense of completion. This chapter of her life, the healing, the growth, the rediscovery of herself, was coming to a close. But a new one was just beginning, full of promise and possibility. She looked around the room one last time, silently thanking it for the shelter and safety it had provided. Then, with a deep breath and a smile, Laura began to pack. She was ready to step into her future, carrying with her the strength she had found, the lessons she had learned, and the unshakable knowledge that she was capable of facing whatever life might bring. A year had passed since Laura had moved into her own apartment, and life had settled into a new rhythm. Her work as a peer counselor had become more than just a job. It was a calling. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to make a difference in someone's life. On a sunny Saturday morning, Laura stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her blouse nervously. Today was a big day. She had been invited to be the keynote speaker at a conference on domestic violence awareness and survivor support. As she fastened the delicate silver necklace Mariana had given her, now a talisman of sorts, Laura took a deep breath, centering herself. The conference hall was packed when Laura took the stage. As she looked out at the sea of faces, survivors, advocates, counselors, and allies, she felt a surge of emotion. This moment, this opportunity to share her story and potentially impact so many lives, was beyond anything she could have imagined a year ago. "Good morning," Laura began, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Laura Silva, and I am a survivor of domestic violence, but more than that, I am a thriver. A year and a half ago, I was trapped in an abusive relationship, convinced that I had no way out. Today, I stand before you not just as someone who escaped, but as someone who has reclaimed her life, and found purpose in helping others do the same. As Laura shared her story, the darkness she had endured, the moment of courage in the supermarket, the long journey of healing and self-discovery, she saw heads nodding, tears being wiped away, and most importantly, sparks of hope, igniting in the eyes of those who might still be struggling. Healing is not a straight line, Laura continued. It's a journey with ups and downs, steps forward and steps back. But each day, each small victory brings you closer to reclaiming your life, and you don't have to walk this path alone. There is a community of survivors and allies ready to support you, to remind you of your strength when you forget. As Laura concluded her speech, the room erupted in applause, but it was the quiet words of thanks, the hugs from fellow survivors, and the determined looks on the faces of those still finding their way that truly touched her heart. After the conference, Laura found a quiet corner to decompress. As she sat there reflecting on how far she had come, a young woman approached her hesitantly. "Excuse me, Mrs. Silver," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted to thank you. Your story, it gave me hope. I've been trying to find the courage to leave, and hearing you speak, I think I'm ready to take that step." Laura felt a lump form in her throat. She reached out, gently squeezing the woman's hand. "You're stronger than you know," she said softly, "and you're not alone. Here's my card. Call me anytime you need support." As the woman walked away, Laura felt a profound sense of coming full circle. Once she had been the one desperately seeking hope. Now she was able to offer that hope to others. That evening, as Laura walked through the park near her apartment, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. The path had been difficult, often painful, but it had led her to a place of strength and purpose she never could have imagined. She sat on a bench, pulling out the journal she still carried with her everywhere. As she began to write, Laura felt a sense of peace wash over her. "Today I stood in front of hundreds of people and shared my story, not as a victim, but as a survivor, as someone who has reclaimed her life and found purpose in helping others do the same. It's a responsibility I never expected to have, but one I embrace with my whole heart. I think about the woman I was a year and a half ago, scared, isolated, believing I had no way out. I wish I could go back and tell her that. Not only would she escape, but she would thrive. That she would find strength she never knew she had, build a community of support, and discover a calling that gives her life new meaning. But then I realize, in a way, I am telling her. Every time I speak to a group, every time I work with a client, every time I share my story, I'm reaching out to all the women who are where I once was. I'm telling them that there is hope, that they are stronger than they know, that a better life is possible. This journey has taught me so much, that healing is ongoing, that strength often comes from vulnerability, that our darkest experiences can become a light for others. I've learned that I am capable of more than I ever imagined, that I am worthy of love and respect, starting with loving and respecting myself. I don't know what the future holds, but I face it without fear. I know there will still be challenges, days when the past feels close. But I also know that I have the strength to face whatever comes. I am not defined by what happened to me, but by how I've chosen to rise above it. To anyone reading this who might be where I once was, you are not alone. You are stronger than you know. And there is a life waiting for you beyond the fear and pain. Take that first step. Reach out. Your journey to healing and reclaiming your life starts now. As Laura closed her journal, she looked up at the sky, now painted in the soft hues of sunset. She took a deep breath, feeling gratitude wash over her, for her freedom, for her strength, for the opportunity to make a difference in the lives of others. She stood ready to walk home to the life she had built for herself. Laura Silver was no longer a victim, no longer just a survivor. She was a thriver, a helper, a beacon of hope for others. And as she walked forward into the gentle evening, she carried with her the unshakable knowledge that she was capable of facing whatever life might bring. In reclaiming her own life, Laura had found her true calling, helping others reclaim theirs. And in that purpose, she had found a joy and fulfillment beyond anything she could have imagined. Her journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But now she walked the path with confidence, hope, and an unwavering belief in the strength of the human spirit to overcome, heal, and thrive. You may also like one of the 2 videos on the screen. Feel free to watch them now or subscribe to the channel to watch them later. Thanks for watching.